أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. Respected sisters, dear brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And allow us to begin by expressing our condolences to ourselves on the martyrdom of our seventh Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim. May God's peace and blessings be upon him. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept everyone's deeds for the remembrance, the commemoration of these types of events that revive the teachings of Ahlulbayt, inshaAllah, and gather us around them. There is in the Holy Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, the third chapter of the Quran, a series of verses that talk about those who are pious, and a number of their traits are mentioned. In verse 134 specifically, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, after talking about those who are pious, He gives us this verse in which we find 5 characteristics, specific characteristics of those that He is calling pious. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first says that they are of those who give freely, who donate, whether they are in ease or in adversity. In situations where it is easy for them to donate, to be charitable, to freely give, and when they are in difficulty and in hardship and adversity, they are still giving, still donating, still being charitable. That's as-sarra wal-dharra. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ. Those who, if we want to translate linguistically in a readable way, we would simply say those who repress their anger, those who control their wrath, those who are always disciplined when it comes to their rage. This is the true meaning of al-Kadhimin al-Ghayz. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, and that's why the interpreters of the Quran have said there is constantly an elevation in this verse. It is going from one level to a higher level, to then an even higher level. Because it is one thing to control your rage and your anger against those who have wronged you. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. And those who will pardon people. Those same people who have wronged them and should have caused rage and anger and wrath in them. So they controlled their rage, they suppressed their anger, but that wasn't enough because the anger is still within you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and they actually pardoned people. They excuse them. This is وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ. This is a higher level. This requires a higher degree of spiritual and moral discipline and purity. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And God loves those who are doers of good. Those who always do good are muhsineen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves them. Especially if they are the ones, you are doing good to the ones who wronged you. First, you controlled your anger, then you pardoned them, then you do good to them when they were the ones who oppressed you and who wronged you. We begin with this verse because this is perhaps the verse that refers to the most popular of the traits, of the characteristics, of the nicknames of our Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. That's why we refer to him as al-Kadhim. And this verse says, وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظَ. This is what it is in reference to. This was the name by which people recognized him. And as we shall see, there were many other names given to the Imam during his life, but this is perhaps the name that we use the most when we refer to the seventh Imam. So we begin with this first verse from the Holy Quran. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam is not an ordinary personality. When we gather together and talk about the lives of people that we consider to be these divine saints that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends to represent Him, to be role models to humanity, these are not normal people that we can just look at and quickly analyze their personality and the events of their lives from a social, political, psychological perspective and quickly do as we would do with anyone else. No matter how much analysis we do, no matter how much we try to do justice to these personalities, it will never be even representative of what we are talking about. In truth, in these cases, and I think many of us understand this, it's almost like we would have to experience the presence of this person to truly start to appreciate what it means for humanity to have access to someone like that. There is a reference in one of the very famous books by Ibn Hajar al-Haytami, al-Sawa'iq al-Muhriqa, in which he talks about, so he's a scholar, a Sunni scholar, who talks about a lot of things in that book, and at some point he is describing the sixth Imam, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, and the influence that he had, the type of person that he was, and the influence that he had on Islam in general, and how he was a source of knowledge to all things we call Islam until today. So this is what he is talking about, and that is in fact how Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam is viewed. We consider him to be the Imam of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam. Others consider him to be a source of knowledge for all, right? And that's why you see the greatest jurists and the other schools of thought, all of them having been either direct or indirect students of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And then after that, he talks about this son of his. So after he is done talking about Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, the sixth Imam, he moves to the son of Imam. And Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam had many sons, but he singles out this son of his, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Of course, he does not believe him to be an Imam, a divinely appointed Imam, as the Shia would believe. Nonetheless, this is how he talks about him. He says, وَهُوَ وَارِثُهُ. So he is continuing to, or ending his discussion on Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Quickly in Arabic, it's one sentence, and then we'll translate it. He says, وَهُوَ وَارِثُهُ عِلْمًا وَمَعْرِفَةً وَكَمَالًا وَفَضْلًا سمي الكاظم لكثرة تجاوزه وحلمه وكان معروفا عند أهل العراق بباب قضاء الحوائج عند الله وكان أعبد أهل زمانه وأعلمهم وأسخاهم. So when he talks about Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he says he is the one who inherited his father's, meaning Imam al-Sadiq, his father's knowledge, expertise, perfections, and virtues. He was called al-Kadhim for the multitude of his pardons, the granted pardons, and his forbearance and patience. He was known amongst the people of Iraq as the door at which God fulfills all needs, Bab al-Hawa'ij. And that's how people, especially in Iraq, still refer to the seventh Imam as being Bab al-Hawa'ij. Whoever has a need, you go and supplicate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the grave of the seventh Imam. And in Iraq, this is well known, and it has been going on since the time the Imam was placed in that grave, and until today, everyone in Iraq does this. In fact, not only the lovers and the followers of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam. And then he continues and says, he was the most devout and the greatest worshipper amongst the people of his time, the most knowledgeable, the most generous amongst them. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam was born in year 128 of Hijrah, meaning year 746. He passes away about 55 years from that point. He is born to his father Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam and a mother by the name of Hamidah, and oftentimes she is referred to as al-Musaffat, as some of the Imams refer to her, the purified, in reference to the scholarship that she carried that she was an extremely knowledgeable woman, and that she was a very pure woman. The time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam was quite complex politically. And we could spend a very long time talking about the complexity of the political environment in which Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam had to live and had to try to perform his imam role, his role as an imam. I'm going to try to touch on the highlights from that time without going into too far into the details. If there is interest, perhaps we can keep some of the discussion more for Q&A if there is interest for that. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam is born at a time, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. He's born at a time when the Abbasid dynasty is becoming a lot stronger than it was at the time of his father and his grandfather. Imam al-Bakr alayhi salam, Imam al-Sadiq, they lived at a time when the dynasty of Bani Umayyah, the Umayyad, was crumbling, and Bani al-Abbas are the ones who tried to seize the control politically, the vacuum that was being created, and they were, of course, active participants in trying to get rid of Bani Umayyah. And so this created a lot of instability socially and politically in that world, which allowed Imam al-Bakr and Imam al-Sadiq to be a lot more open. There was less attention on them because of the political turmoil and instability happening in that world. By the time Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam appears on the scene, Bani al-Abbas, the Abbasids, are a lot stronger, a lot more stable. And so they can work with a lot more focus, and we are going to see, and if we wanted to go into a lot more detail, we would see that, in fact, they are a lot more cunning, they are a lot more strategic, and they are a lot more ruthless than Bani Umayyah ever were. As difficult as that may be to understand, if we understand just how ruthless Bani Umayyah were. Bani al-Abbas were even more ruthless than Bani Umayyah, and they were backed by a much better, deeper understanding of religion, and backed by a lot more social capital. Because Bani Umayyah were considered from day one to have been people who only joined Islam very, very late, after they were forced, after they had fought the Holy Prophet for over 2 decades. Now they had to make a choice, either continue to fight and most likely lose, or join Islam, and that's what they did. So many of those who lived at that time and afterwards never considered them to have been people who truly accepted the teachings of Islam. They were using Islam for their own political gain, and that's quickly what became apparent because they created their own dynasty that had nothing to do with the teachings of Islam, and this lasted for about 7 decades. So with the movement of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, we see that their dynasty and the cracks in it, the weakness in it, become a lot more apparent. Imam al-Hussein's movement brought that to the fore. And so this continued until the time of Imam al-Bakr and was sealed at the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when the Abbasids were able to take over and rule in their own way. So Bani al-Abbas are considered to be in the grand family of Bani Hashim. They are the cousins of al-Alawiyin, of the progeny of Imam Ali alayhi salam. They are cousins with them. And so they are considered to be from within the household of the Holy Prophet. This gives them an extremely important social capital in the eyes of most Muslims. They are respected as the family of the Holy Prophet, not in the strict sense that we consider them. We consider some people to be in the household of the Holy Prophet or not. They are still in the bigger, greater family of the Holy Prophet because they are the descendants of his uncle Al-Abbas. And so, in addition to that, during that whole time, Bani Umayyah were of course ruthless against them. They have a reason to try to seek vengeance and to re-establish their right and their presence. And they have a very good understanding of religion. They have a very good understanding of social, political realities. And from all of that, when they seize the power, that's why they are able to be a lot more strategic, a lot more cunning, and a lot more ruthless. And so the main way for them to have reached power is to say we are the family of the Holy Prophet and we were severely oppressed, and everybody knows that this religion is best represented by the family of the Holy Prophet, and so everybody helped them people, especially the outsiders, those who don't know what is going on behind the scenes, they don't really distinguish between the different lines within the family of the Holy Prophet. And they came as a very popular movement. People having huge hopes that finally we are going to see the true Islam emerge and rule, and we are all going to live lives of prosperity under the true teachings of Islam. Very quickly, as soon as they started to become a lot more stabilized and they were able to start ruling, the first thing, or one of the first things that they started to do, was to get rid of those who allowed them to reach, because they are competitors in their eyes. They will always be, if they allowed them to reach this rule and to reach being the kings or the rulers or the sovereigns, they might allow others, or worse yet, they might themselves aspire to become. And this is the true family of the Holy Prophet through the line of Imam Ali alayhi salam and his progeny. So it became apparent from day one that the first thing that they were going to do was to exterminate, was to get rid of the family represented by the line of Imam Ali alayhi salam. And this is exactly what happened throughout their entire dynasty, starting from Imam al-Bakr, Imam al-Sadiq, Imam al-Kadhim, Imam al-Rida, Imam al-Jawad, Imam al-Hadi, Imam al-Askari, and the reason why Imam al-Mahdi goes into occultation. During that whole time, it's Bani al-Abbas who are ruling, and they become more and more and more ruthless with every Imam. So now we reach Imam al-Kadhim. So first, he is very young, between 4 and 8 years of age, during the time of Abu Abbas al-Saffah, and then right after, al-Mansur al-Dawaniqi becomes the Khalifa. Mansur al-Dawaniqi, he is ruthless and he rules for a very long time, for a couple of decades, perhaps 22 years or so that he is ruling, and he is the one who poisons and assassinates and kills Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. And then for the next 10 years, he remains the Khalifa. His main purpose during that time, Mansur al-Dawaniqi, is trying to establish Baghdad, the city of Baghdad, as the capital of the Islamic world. That city was not yet built in the way that he saw fit and appropriate for a grand Khalifa like him. So he starts to focus on erecting the city as being this amazing metropolis that really is becoming of the entirety of the Islamic world. And so most of his energy goes into that for the many years at the beginning of the Imamah of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. So the attention is not fully on Imam al-Kadhim, and this gives him a bit of space to be able to work a little bit, to act a little bit, to teach a little bit. While there is pressure, the pressure is not too intense. And when the pressure starts to be intense on the Imam, right after, in that year, al-Mansur dies. And then the Imam is now fully coming into his full Imamah. The Imamah of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam lasts for 33 years. So it is one of the longer periods of Imamah, but it is not an easy Imamah for him to, for instance, we would imagine an Imam to be able to give a sermon, a speech like I am right now. The Imam would not have been able to do that. The moment he does any open activity, any public activity, he is putting his life in danger and the lives of anyone who attends or listens or is openly seen as being an associate or a loyal follower of the Imam in danger. And we're going to see some of the examples of what happened during that time. Right from the beginning of his life, we see that Imam alayhi salam was very prominent and very distinct from even among the sons of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. He had many sons. Many people thought initially that perhaps one of the other sons of Imam al-Sadiq may have been the Imam. Ismail, for instance, there's another group that started to follow another of the sons of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, Abdullah. He's called al-Aftah. And there's a whole discussion that we can have on the movements that happened during that time. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam was right away from the beginning very distinctive for his knowledge. He was considered a genius at 4 and 5 years old. Abu Hanifa would come to see his teacher, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, to answer questions, and he would wait outside. And at some point, Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he sees him, he comes out. Imam al-Kadhim is between 4 and 5 years old here. And so he wants to, entertain himself. He sees this cute young boy come out. And so he starts to ask him questions. And he asked a question that he came to ask Imam Sadiq. He told him one of the biggest questions that was taking place at that time was about free will and predeterminism. He asks Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, as a 4 or 5-year-old, what do you say? Who is the creator of the action of the human being? Is it the human being or is it God? So Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam answered him. He told him there are only 3 logical possibilities. That it is either fully the human being or fully God, or it is a shared ownership of the act between God and the human being. And it cannot be God, and he explains why. And it cannot be a shared responsibility between God and the human being, and he explains why. And the only option left is that the human being is the author and responsible, therefore, of his own actions. And Abu Hanifa got up and he said, well, I got the answer I was looking for, and this is ذُرِّيَّةً بَعْضُهَا مِنْ بَعْضٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows where he put the message. He put his message. And this is one example. There are many others. He was asked other questions of fiqh, questions of aqa'id, and the Imam was very distinctive from a very young age. In addition to the fact that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam would tell his companions that from all my sons, he is the one who is going to be my successor, and this was very well known. Except that when he died, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam wanted to protect Imam al-Kadhim, so he did not leave his will with Imam al-Kadhim. He left a will with 5 people. One of them being the Khalifa himself. He named the Khalifa as his inheritor. And he named the governor of the city as his inheritor. And he named one other of his sons as an inheritor. And Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam and his wife as inheritors. And so initially the Khalifa had said, whoever he has named as inheritor, go kill him. And so when the Khalifa heard that he had named him as one of the inheritors, he said, cancel that verdict. We're not proceeding with killing all the inheritors. In any case, so when we continue with the time of al-Mansur al-Dawaniqi, as we said, the Imam is coming into his own imamah after the demise, after the martyrdom of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. During al-Mansur, we start to see a number of revolutions appear. And during these revolutions, there are many people who are taking the sword against the Khilafah of the time for all sorts of reasons. Bottom line, there is a tremendous amount of oppression and tyranny happening. That's the bottom line. We can go into a lot of details, but that is what is happening. And so we see one way or another, the same habits and the same trends and the same reasons that led to, considering Bani Umayyah as being entirely un-Islamic and being oppressive and being tyrannical, continuing simply in other shapes and other forms. And so, as we said, when he starts to put pressure on Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, al-Mansur al-Dawaniqi, the Imam does not really give too much attention to him, and al-Mansur al-Dawaniqi dies in that year or so. And this is when the Imam is going to be dealing with 3 Khulafa in succession, one after the other. The first one being al-Mahdi, so these are the sons of al-Mansur, al-Mahdi, and then al-Hadi, and then Harun al-Rashid, the one they refer to as Harun al-Rashid. So we start with al-Mahdi. And here we start to very clearly see, as we said, the changes in strategy. Now Bani al-Abbas are becoming a lot more stable. They are a lot more in control of the entire infrastructure of their state and how they operate and how they deal with those that they consider to be enemies and dissenters and so on and so forth. And so we start with al-Mahdi. So he lasts about 10 years as a Khalifa. There is, if we want to be objective, we can maybe split his Khilafah into 2 parts when it comes to the life of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. There's the first 6 years of his Khilafah and then the last 4. The first 6 years, he seems to be very busy. He is busy with all sorts of other things, and he seems to be distracted. His attention is away from the Imam, and the Imam at that time is living where? The Imam is living in al-Madinah al-Munawwarah. The Khilafah of Bani al-Abbas right now is in Baghdad, in Iraq. So the Imam is far away geographically, spatially, the Imam is away from the center, from the source of the Khilafah. And they say that was enough to give the Imam a little bit of room, a little bit of ability to work. A lot of people were extremely hopeful when al-Mansur died and his son al-Mahdi became the Khalifa, because they considered his son to be a lot more lenient, not as enraged as his father was, not as someone who is as stingy as his father. That's why he's called al-Dawaniqi. He was so obsessed with money, with the dawaniq and the sound that money makes when it falls, that he was considered to be extremely oppressive. A lot of his oppression comes from his love of wealth and money, whereas his son was not considered to be of that type. And so people were very hopeful. He becomes the Khalifa. Initially, he shows a lot of generosity. Initially, one of his first decisions as a Khalifa is that all those who are imprisoned for political reasons, today we would say political prisoners, may be released. There's a general pardon. It starts off giving people, hope that this is going to be perhaps a different type of Khilafah, but soon afterwards, his hatred towards the Alawis, the lineage, the progeny of Imam Ali alayhi salam, became very apparent once again. He is no different, if not worse, than those who were before him. And then very quickly, his main attention turned towards, and this is something that we see throughout the Khilafat, both of Bani Umayyah and Bani al-Abbas, his own entertainment. Indecency, corruption, foolishness, singing and dancing and drinking and any type of indecency you could think of. Now he has the coffers, the treasury of the state at his disposal to entertain himself in however way he wants. The wastefulness and so on and so forth. The books are filled with these types of details, chapter after chapter. And as a result, because he was so open with this, as opposed to other Khulafa who hid it behind closed doors, this started to spread in the dynasty of Bani Umayyah and in society at large, since the Khalifa himself is well known to do this. So why be more strict with the people? Okay, and so some thing that also became clear at the time of al-Mahdi was that people were being hired to be scholars of the state. So that you are receiving a salary from the state and you are working for the state and you are saying what is going to be beneficial to the state. You will create, fabricate, distort teachings so long as it is going to show that those who are currently in power are good people, they have a legitimate rule, everybody ought to obey them, and this goes very, very far. And this is why we say that their ability to use religion to their own means was very clear. And here we have many, many examples. I don't want to go into too much detail. As when it comes to the Imam himself, we see that he was at that time, at the time of al-Mahdi, he was living under extreme surveillance. So even while we're saying that the first 6 years were more or less very peaceful in terms of the life of the Imam, this is because the Imam was extremely careful in not doing anything that attracts unwanted attention to him or to his followers. Otherwise, there was extreme surveillance. So in the streets, the spies and the informants in every mosque, in the house of every person, there are always people coming and going, watching every move, writing reports, writing letters, going themselves and informing one way or another, because you get handsomely rewarded to inform about anything that seems to go against the rule of those who are ruling, especially at that time. And that is one of the traits of the rule of Bani al-Abbas, especially during those times. We would say today that, they had kind of an extreme phobia, almost to the point where, it's not entirely stable. They are so afraid, so skeptical, so full of doubt that the least movement they notice from anyone, they will interpret it as someone is starting an entire movement to bring our entire dynasty down and to kill us and to replace us. So that was one more reason for their ruthlessness and their, the savage way that they ruled their state. Then in year 164, so this is about 6 years into his Khilafah, al-Mahdi comes to visit al-Madinah al-Munawwara, and this is when there is a very clear shift, because now he encounters the Imam directly, he sees the Imam, he talks to the Imam, he interacts with the Imam, and that in itself is not a problem. What he notices and what he witnesses is how people interact with the Imam, is how people consider the Imam to be something that he could never become, even though he is a Khalifa. People are dealing with the Imam like someone who is sacred, who is divine, sanctified, holy. They just want to be around him, to listen to him, to obey him. In al-Madinah al-Munawwara, the Imam is extremely respected. He has his students, he has normal people who consider him to be this sanctified, holy figure. And this is too much for the Khalifa to handle. And so this is when you see the arrogance, the jealousy, the hatred start to become very apparent. It is too much for him to be able to handle all of this. At the beginning, there are a few interactions with the Imam. He comes, he asks the Imam some things. For instance, he asked the Imam, what is actually the proof? Convince me. You are supposed to be this amazing scholar. Convince me that wine is actually prohibited in Islam. Why do you say that it is so prohibited? Because he's addicted to it and he cannot live without it for a single day, as we said. Again, he wrote to the Imam and he told him, in this case, he wrote to the Imam and he said, I want to expand the Haram, the holy mosque in Mecca and the holy mosque in Medina. And people are preventing me, saying I'm not allowed to touch it because it's a holy space and it must stay as is, but I want to expand it. And the Imam wrote back telling him, you are allowed to expand it. And so there are things that happened that looked like it was going in the right way. There was hope for, but as we said, this other perhaps psychological dimension of his personality, perhaps others, led to very quickly imprisoning the Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. So he imprisons Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam for about 1 year. During that time, we don't have a lot of details on how the Imam lived during that year of imprisonment, as opposed to having a lot more details about how he lived as a prisoner towards the end of his life, when we will talk about it a little bit later. But it is said very clearly, and everybody knew that this is what happened because the Khalifa openly talked about this. He says that Imam Ali alayhi salam came to him in a dream, and he talked to him in a way that really shook him and scared him. And so when he woke up, he decided immediately that he was releasing Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam after 1 year of imprisonment. And so Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam is released. And this is the first time that he is officially imprisoned. Okay? And then we move, so the Imam here would have been in his late 30s. Then when the Imam is about 40 years old, al-Mahdi dies, the next Khalifa comes into power, and this is al-Hadi. When al-Hadi comes into Khilafah, there was no pretense, as was the case with other Khulafa. He is considered to be a young man, about 25 years old. From the beginning, he is extremely open that all he is interested in is his own entertainment, his own foolishness, indecency, corruption, you name it, it was taking place during that time. And you know, if I can read some of the, if you wanted to, when you go through the books of, all books of history, when they talk about him, they talk about his arrogance, his tyranny, his corruption, his ruthlessness, his indecency, his shamelessness, and so on and so forth. So this kind of gives you an idea of the character that just came into power as the Khalifa of the Islamic world. And so he is continuing in the same path as the rest of Bani al-Abbas, with his hatred towards the progeny of Imam Ali alayhi salam. There are also movements of revolution against him during his time, led by some of these Alawis and others. And one of the biggest ones is led by al-Husayn ibn Ali, who is a descendant of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. And this lasts for a while. This man was considered to be kind of a holy, sanctified man. At the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, the Imam had correspondences with him. This is not an ordinary person. Like, people considered him to be a saint in his time. And at some point, the confrontation became too much. They left al-Madinah al-Munawwara. There was a back and forth. They went to a place called Fakh, and he was joined with perhaps 300 of his companions, this al-Husayn ibn Ali, from the progeny of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, and Bani al-Abbas sent gigantic armies against them, and they killed them. And they repeated what you find in the tragedy of Karbala in Fakh. And that's why Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam says there is no greater tragedy that has befallen us after Karbala than the tragedy of Fakh. Right? So they kill them, they cut their heads, they bring the heads to the Khalifa. They repeated the same, events and tragedy that had happened under the rule of Bani Umayyah with Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, Bani al-Abbas just repeated the same thing. The difference is that they were not led by the infallible Imam of his time. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam stayed away from them and told them not to, even though he considered them to be righteous and to be, led by an extremely righteous, sanctified, scholarly man who was simply rising for justice. In any case, so this continues, and after the killing, the Hadi writes to Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, telling him, I know that you are the leader of this household, and so if there is this movement, you must be implicated one way or another, you're leading it one way or another. So openly threatening the Imam, telling him, you are next, I'm about to kill you. People around the Imam, everybody who knew about these letters coming to the Imam, were extremely worried when these letters reached the Imam, and the Imam told them, do not worry, now no harm is going to befall me. If we look simply, purely at the books of history, the books of history simply say that he died right away after. If you look at our own religious books, you will see the full details of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam going to perform a prayer, and we even have the full, words, that the wording of the prayer that the Imam recited, and Al-Hadi died immediately afterwards. So this is what happened. Al-Hadi does not rule for more than about a year as a Khalifa after Al-Mahdi, and then the one who comes into power at that time is Harun, the one that called himself or was called al-Rashid. Right? So each one of them gives a nickname, a title to himself: Al-Mahdi, Al-Hadi, Al-Rashid. Al-Rashid being, the wise one. Okay? So is he truly wise? And this is perhaps one, to me, of the saddest chapters when you study Islamic history, especially when you study history even by Muslims, written by Muslims. But beyond that, looking at Islamic history from a more secular, Orientalist, whatever sources, that this is the period of Islam that is considered to be the golden age of Islam. So basically the propaganda machine of Harun al-Rashid and those who came after worked. So he tried to present himself as the golden age of Islam. And today, centuries later, we are still referring to it, and the textbooks and history books are still telling us that that was the golden age of Islam, right? In any case, so even when we look at the personality of Harun al-Rashid, Harun was no different than the Abbasid rulers who came before him or those who came after him. He was, conniving and cunning and strategic and ruthless and barbaric and savage. And he started immediately with very strategic, clear ways. Even the way he got into power, there's a whole discussion on how the Abbasids themselves are the ones who, from within the household, got rid of Al-Mahdi and then Al-Hadi. Perhaps it was the mother or someone very close to Harun who got rid of the previous Khalifa, so that Harun finally makes it as the Khalifa. In any case, so he comes into power from the beginning. If you want to be objective about him, you have to say that he is no less corrupt, he is no less indecent, he is no less oppressive than those who came before him. For those, sometimes I have even heard scholars who are supposed to be, knowledgeable followers of Ahlulbayt, who understand the history of Ahlulbayt, alayhim as-salam. Harun al-Rashid is the one who destroyed the grave of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to make it disappear, so that people don't know where Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is buried, so that they can go perform a ziyarah of Imam al-Hussein and his grave. In any case, so what he did was try to hunt down, to identify and hunt down anyone who is influential, who is a figure, who is an important personality at his time, those who are from the progeny of Imam Ali alayhi salam. He would hunt them down. There were assassinations, there were executions, there was torture, there was imprisonment. For those who have studied, how Muawiyah dealt with the companions of Imam Ali alayhi salam and his followers, this is the same movie replaying again with Harun and anyone who is remotely close association with the Imams of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam, the students of Imam al-Sadiq. And that's why during that whole time, you see Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam never appearing properly, openly in public. Because all of this is happening, and any public movement from the Imam is not only going to put his own life in danger, it's going to put in danger the lives of anyone who associates with the Imam openly. And this is why there is so much, if you go in the books of history and you read about even the ahadith of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, many of the ahadith don't refer to him as Imam al-Kadhim, hadith al-Imam al-Kadhim, or Musa bin Jafar. This is more rare, or this was done later when someone takes a hadith and retransmits it, or re-refers. Oftentimes is al-Abd al-Salih, Aba al-Hasan, Aba Ibrahim, al-Alim. No one knows who they're talking about. So that no one, if you find the actual hadith in a document that they are carrying, no one can say this is a hadith that came to you from this man. The Imam of the name of the Imam would not even be openly mentioned. This is the kind of environment that Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam lived in his entire life. From the beginning of his life, from the beginning of his imamah, 22 years later, until his martyrdom, this is the life of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. A few movements appeared in the time of Harun al-Rashid that are worth mentioning. One of them is the movement of Shu'ubiyya. I mentioned them in passing. Again, I think there is a lot of distortion around this movement. If you read the books of the Orientalists, Western historians who talk about Islam, they say the Shu'ubiyya movement appeared at the time of Harun al-Rashid. Shu'ubiyya did not appear at the time of Harun al-Rashid. It's only someone who starts studying Islamic history at the time of Harun al-Rashid and has no clue what has happened until then that would say, it seems that this is a new movement that appears. What is Shu'ubiyya? Shu'ubiyya is a movement that clearly it was a political and social and cultural and potentially, partially religious movement, but much more those other aspects, that basically says that the Arabs are not superior to the other races. The bottom line is, the crux of the matter is that the Arabs are not superior to, because there are versions of Shu'ubiyya. So one version says they are all equal, and one version says the Arabs are inferior to the other races. And this did not emerge at the time of Harun al-Rashid as a movement. This emerged at the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, the time of the second Khalifa in the Islamic world. Because of his policies, there was already a movement between Arabs and non-Arabs. Which Arab tribe do you belong to? Depending on that, you will receive different distinctions. And if you are an Arab but you do not belong to Bani Hashim or Bani Umayyah or one of the big tribes, then you're already second class, third class, fourth class. And then if you are none of those but you are an Arab, you're lower. If you are non-Arab, you're even lower. If you are, and so on and so forth. And so he created, there are scholars who have looked at this and they said he created a system of about 27 layers, social classes. And it was not simply an ideological matter and a cultural matter. There were real distinctions in that society. Like you would receive a different amount when wealth is distributed based on where and which class you belong to. And this started from the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and this evolved over time. There were ups and downs, there were extremist views that appeared, there were infighting that continued, and this continued all the way to, if you want to study Thawrat al-Zanj, the slaves, the black slaves who revolted at the time of Imam al-Hadi and Imam al-Askari. That's a whole discussion in the books of history about this. Where did all of this come from? These are racist policies. They have nothing to do with Islam, right? But you see that there are these dynasties who want to use the people like objects and do with them as they please. And they want to bring and justify bringing some people in and making them of a higher status than others. And then there's a counter movement to that, and so on and so forth. And so this does not emerge and appear at the time of Harun al-Rashid. Harun al-Rashid is one more Khalifa who came to make use of this relationship between Arab and non-Arab, and the Abbasids quickly started to move towards bringing in non-Arabs to rule in positions as governors, as heads of the police force, military, because they could no longer rely on the Arabs. And to appease the sentiments of those who are entering into Islam and who are non-Arabs, because Islam is still expanding. and for all sorts of other reasons. Okay, so this explains what happened during the time of al-Amin al-Mahmun. You see, how al-Amin was closer to Bani al-Abbas and the Arabs. Al-Ma'mun at the time of Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, there's a war between the brothers. They killed the third brother, then the two brothers went into battle, and then one of them killed the other. These are the sons of Harun al-Rashid, right? The same movement is continuing during that whole time. In any case, the other movement that appeared during that time is, we can openly and bluntly call it the atheist movement. So atheism was starting to spread, especially at the time of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, right? So there is an opening, a cultural, social, and even political opening of the Islamic world towards other civilizations, but it was not as innocent as that. This is not just, a normal flux and movement of ideas and philosophies between cultures and civilizations. This was openly and very clearly and intentionally and strategically being funded and supported and used by Bani al-Abbas for all sorts of reasons. They were the ones who wanted to start moving, opening up the idea that there are many ideologies and many philosophies and many religious thoughts, all of them worth considering, and perhaps let's reject the Islamic thoughts and consider these instead, and so on and so forth. This starts at the time of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam and then continues. What happens, just to summarize it quickly, during the time of the Abbasid rule, you see that they will use today, unfortunately, we would call it, religious topics or themes or controversies as though they are truly theological religious controversies. They were not. They were politically fabricated so that Bani al-Abbas would consider, let's say, this group of people, they want to demonize them and they want to get rid of them, they want to exterminate them, they want to imprison them, they want to call them corrupt, having the wrong beliefs. And so suddenly they make a certain belief the right one and another one the wrong one, because they know that that group of people believes in this. And so they will say, well, this belief is clearly wrong and anyone who believes in this is a heretic, so let's go kill all the heretics. This is how Bani al-Abbas operated throughout their whole dynasty. So if you hear about, a huge controversy whether the Holy Quran is created or not created, this is how Bani al-Abbas used it. One day Bani al-Abbas said, yes, of course the Holy Quran is created. The speech of God is a creation. And then some generations later, they turned around, they said, no, it cannot be a creation. It's eternal as God is, because it's His speech. It's not created. As if that makes any difference in the lives of Muslims or the Islamic world or anyone. Okay? Regardless of whether it is created or not, we can talk about that at another time. Right? And this is just one example. So the introduction of all of these ideologies was very clear. That's part of it. And then we continue to see that the way suddenly Bani al-Abbas started to use that is that they fought it in a very extremist way. You do not believe in what we believe in, we will kill you. And so they started killing people, assassinating people, because either they were openly atheists or they had atheistic tendencies. And you see the school of Ahlulbayt alayhim as-salam with the Imams. The Imams would sit and have dialogue and intellectual, rational debates with these people, because this is a discussion, this is about ideas. I can convince you if I am given the chance to sit with you and discuss logically your beliefs, we will reach a proper conclusion. We should not be dealing with this by killing people, exterminating them, and being extremist with them. Correct? In any case, so we see a lot of the debates. Yes, of course, during the time of Imam al-Sadiq, this continued. Even the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, a lot of his debates are about proving the existence of God, proving the attributes of God, that God is of these attributes and not those. The discussion of free will and predeterminism continued. The discussion of free will, human beings, whether they have free will or not. All of these, you see a lot of discussions, a lot of narrations, teachings from Imam al-Kadhim, which tells us that this was still ongoing during his time. We also see, and I'll stop with that and then I'll move towards perhaps a little bit more of the work of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. One more very clear movement that appeared is, we see very clearly the emergence of different Islamic schools of thought. Today we would call them madahib, sects, schools of thought within Islam start to emerge and really take shape during that time. And of course, once again, this is not innocent. This is Bani al-Abbas openly saying, proclaiming, so-and-so is officially recognized as a scholar. And so whatever he says goes, and everybody else, their beliefs are wrong, their version of Islam is wrong, their interpretation of Islam is wrong. This is the proper version. And then let's change and go from here to there. And overnight, we have a new madhab and someone else who is hired, who is paid, who is, and so on and so forth. And the others suddenly become, unwanted or unacceptable beliefs, or so on and so forth. And this starts to be very clear. And as we say, for all those who have studied the lives of Ahlulbayt during that time, it seems clear that one of the main, obsessions, focus points of Bani al-Abbas is that they need to create other sources of legitimate religious knowledge, other sources of legitimate knowledge besides Ahlul Bayt. If you put the Imam, any of the Imams in front of people, people are going to follow that Imam. If they hear the Imam, they will be convinced by what he says. They will see that this is not an ordinary person. They are divine, they are saintly, they are different. There's no competition. So instead, the best thing to do is to isolate the Imam, find a way so that the Imam cannot be seen, cannot have open discussions and public presence and so on and so forth, distract the Imams, isolate the Imams, and create alternatives. And so you introduce scholars, you pump them up, you create a propaganda machine around it, you publish their works, you give them schools, you give them students, and that becomes the official madhab version of understanding Islam of the state. And when it is state funded, it becomes powerful very quickly and at the exclusion of everything else. Everything else becomes undesirable, and then the state can be lenient or extremist in how it deals with the undesirable, how far it goes in dealing with the undesirable. And we have the full spectrum with Bani al-Abbas and how they dealt with all of that. So during this environment, we see that the school that was created at the time of Imam al-Bakr and Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, the school of Ahlul Bayt, while all of this is happening politically and culturally and religiously, that school continues to try to do the work that it has always done. And its work is, we are going to preserve the true teachings of this religion, and we are going to try to bring them to the people who are interested in learning them. Really, that school continues to do that work throughout that time. And we see that at the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, this is what he has to try to continue to do, except that his circumstances are extremely difficult and very different from the circumstances of Imam al-Bakr and Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, his father and his grandfather, who would openly sit in the mosque of the Holy Prophet in Medina and give lectures and teach. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam had at least 4,000 students sit in front of him, and he would teach them Islam. And he would teach them every aspect of Islam. He would teach Quran, and he would teach hadith, and he would teach fiqh. And all of these people went on to their lands, and they became sources and references of Islamic knowledge. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam cannot do any of that. So he has to find alternative ways of doing this work. And the greater context that we have to keep in mind, and now I'm going to make a small digression, but some of the brothers, when I asked, is there a specific theme or topic you're interested in? They said, perhaps hadith, the science, the discipline of hadith, the transmission of the narrations. So I'll say a couple of words about that, the work of Imam al-Kadhim. But we need to understand the context. The context is that, this is perhaps surprising to a lot of people, even Muslims, when you study the history of hadith, what happened? This is a discipline that emerges, and today everybody talks about it as a very technical, very well-known science in Islam. Well, this was not always the case, and it was certainly not the case after the passing away of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. As soon as the Holy Prophet passes away and the first Khalifa comes, Abu Bakr comes into power, that state introduced policies that says it is forbidden for any Muslim in this state to write or to transmit or to publish or to repeat a hadith. And this lasted for 99 years. Let's round it to 100 years. Until year 99 of Hijrah, So about 9 years after the passing away of the Holy Prophet ﷺ, it was forbidden, it was illegal. You would be severely punished by the state if you were caught having books that have hadith, if you were caught writing hadith, if you were caught teaching hadith, repeating hadith. You are not allowed. The only person who is allowed is whoever the state decides is officially allowed to teach hadith, to transmit hadith, to say hadith. This is an extremely important contextual piece to understand what happened to the hadith, to the narrations of the Holy Prophet after the Holy Prophet. At the time of the Holy Prophet would tell them, whatever I say to you, write it down. The day he dies, they said all of that has to be destroyed. Because people will be confused between the words of the Prophet and the words of the Quran, and it will distort the Quran. Under that pretext, the words of the Holy Prophet disappeared. So, where do we find the words of the Holy Prophet? If the state tells you so and so is an official source of the hadith of the Prophet, you may go learn hadith from them. At a certain time, only Aisha was a source of hadith of the Holy Prophet. Only Abu Hurairah was an official source of the Holy Prophet. Where did all of these companions who had learned that hadith of the Holy Prophet, who had lived with him for years, they were with him night and day. They witnessed everything he said, how he behaved, how he slept, and how he woke up, and how he ate, and how he prayed, and how he spoke. Where did all of this go? Overnight, censorship. It disappeared. Until it was a discipline, a field that was reintroduced. Now people may start writing the hadith of the Holy Prophet. Yeah, how many of those who are still alive now, who are living now, in year 100, are of those who were alive at the time of the Holy Prophet? None, or very, very few. So what is left is either what some people were able to hide. What was left is distortion. What was left is fabrication. And now there has to be a whole movement to try to restore the sayings of the Holy Prophet. This is the classical history of Islam. What is the exception to all of this? The exception to all of this is Imam Ali alayhi salam and the followers of Imam Ali. From day one, Imam Ali alayhi salam says, everything the Holy Prophet taught me, I would write it down. And that's why we have a book of Ali and a book of Fatima. Writing is very important. It needs to be preserved and protected and documented and passed on down the generations. And the followers of Imam Ali also wrote down everything he said. And they would hide it at the expense of their lives. They knew that if that book is found, they would be killed. They would be tortured. But to them it was worth it. This is far more precious than gold. These are words that need to continue to exist down the generations. We're going to pass these down the generations. So this continues at the time of the companions of Imam Ali. And that's why when you go back to the books of hadith and the books of rijal, all of the companions of Imam Ali, you study them. And the companions of Imam al-Hasan, companions of Imam al-Hussein, companions of Imam al-Sajjad, companions of Imam al-Bakr, all of them are authors. All of them have works. And they have no counterparts. Those who are not the followers of Ahlulbayt don't have these works. They're not allowed. But Ahlulbayt are ordering their followers to write. So then, when this censorship is removed, which school still has the narrations of the Holy Prophet and a true source, even if you do not consider them to be divinely appointed leaders, as their followers believe them to be, you still know that these people are the descendants of the Holy Prophet and that they have never stopped learning and memorizing and repeating and transmitting and teaching the sayings of the Holy Prophet. And this continues down the line until we reach Imam al-Bakr, Imam al-Sadiq, and Imam al-Kadhim. And this is when you start to see, at the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, you start to see the big compendiums of ahadith start to appear. In the classical Islamic world. Not in the world of the companions of the Imams, where these compendiums, many of them, had already started to appear. There were many of them in existence, and if you go back in the books of biography, you see the lists, the dozens upon dozens of works that they left behind. And all of these containing documented, word for word, the words of the Holy Prophet, of Imam Ali, and the Imams. With that bit of history, in this field, they say that in the world of the followers of Ahlulbayt, the scholars, they identified 18 scholars, 18 transmitters of ahadith that they refer to as Ashab al-Ijma'. Those 18 are considered to be the people of the consensus. The consensus about what? About their authenticity and reliability. So that if you have a hadith coming to you from one of them, you don't need to go digging into the authenticity of that hadith. From all of the companions, they say we agreed on those 18. There's a whole discussion on should others be included or not, but at least those 18, there's a general agreement on them. These are the greatest of the greats. 6 of them were at the time of Imam al-Bakr, mainly Imam al-Bakr. 6 of them mainly during the time of Imam al-Sadiq. And then the next 6 are during the time of Imam al-Kadhim and Imam al-Rida. Okay, many of them were alive at the times of multiple Imams, studied and transmitted a hadith from multiple Imams, 2, 3, 4 and more Imams. Okay, but they were mainly active under one of the Imams, and that's how they put them by generation under one of these 3 categories. This is not to say that this is a total number of the transmitters and the students of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Imam al-Kadhim, if you go back in the list of biographies, he had at least, today they are listed, their biographies are known, 320 transmitters of his ahadith. So today you can go back in the books of history, the technical works, and you find the names of 320 people, many of them scholars, who went at different points in time to study and to transmit the works of the Imam, either directly or by leaving it in their works that they have left behind. These are the sources of our hadith. During that time, we already talked about the extreme types of surveillance and spying and informants and how the Imam would not be able to openly teach and transmit these ahadith. And as we said, this also extended to anyone who would associate with Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. So these people had to find ways to stay outside of any sphere of being directly identified as being the direct students of the Imam or the transmitters of the hadith of the Imam. So you can imagine how difficult it would be to try to be a student of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam during his life. Okay, still we have a number of them that were able to find ways to do that, and this is where we find, for instance, in the ahadith and in the way that the ahadith are transmitted, there's a lot of use of metaphors and allegories. There's a lot of use of coded language. There is a lot of use of indirect nuances, subtleties, symbolic language, and so on and so forth. And the way that the teaching happened, of course, it was not in large public gatherings. It was private gatherings. It was in the middle of the night. It was while you're traveling from a spot to another spot during the travel, and so on and so forth. A lot of the teaching was taking place in that way. And we see that the Imam had continued to develop and evolve and mature something that had started a couple of Imams before, which is the network of the representatives of the Imam. So these are scholars that the Imam considers to be reliable, who come, who study under the Imams, who carry their knowledge back to their big centers in which they live. And people there would know that so-and-so is an authentic, reliable, legitimate student of the Imams, and you may go learn from them, you may reach the Imam indirectly through them. And so the Imams had people in Iraq, they had people in Khurasan and Ray and Asfahan. In Iraq there was in Kufa and in Basra and Baghdad and Wasit and elsewhere, Medina, Mecca, Yemen, Egypt, Tunisia, and so on and so forth. The Imams had students there who are direct representatives of theirs, who are active there, who are known to be their legitimate, trustworthy representatives. I want to use maybe two quick examples. One of them is Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman. I mentioned these 18 important figures, 6 of them being mainly under Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. So under Yunus ibn Abdul Rahman, so he's initially from al-Madinah al-Munawwara, very, very famous scholar, very famous transmitter, companion of the Imams. He lived under 4 Imams. He worked and transmits from 4 Imams, Imam al-Sadiq, Imam al-Kadhim, Imam al-Rida, and Imam al-Jawad alayhim salam. He left almost 60 works. He was known for his extreme acts of devotion and worship. He performed the Hajj 54 times and the Umrah 54 times each. And he had over 200 teachers. He would look for anyone who carried the narrations of the Imams and he would go learn under them. And he lists 200 or more of his teachers of the Ahadith, just so that we appreciate who this man is and how hard he is working to put together and bring together the Ahadith of Ahlulbayt alayhim salam and preserve them for the next generation. Muhammad ibn Abi Umayr. He's Iraqi from Baghdad. So I just spoke about someone from Hijaz, now someone from Baghdad. He lived and was active under 3 Imams, Imam al-Kadhim, Imam al-Rida, Imam al-Jawad alayhim salam. Extremely devoted worshipper. And there are many narrations or reports that I have seen in which they say that he was known to perform the sujood of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. He would perform a sujood from after the prayer of Fajr and remain in a state of sujood until the prayer of Dhuhr, till the prayer of dawn, performing a single sujood, a single sajda, because he had learned that from Imam al-Kadhim, that he had seen do that. He would perform a single sajda that lasted all of these hours. At some point, this man was captured. He was imprisoned. He was tortured. He was lashed 100 lashes. And he says himself, I was sure that I may die. And the torture was so severe that I was almost going to spell out the names that I am being asked to spell out, which is, who are the Shia of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam? Tell us their names. Give us their names. This is what tells us how much of a secret network all of this was. And clearly, they thought that he had those names. And clearly, he says he had those names. But at the end, he did not give any of those names away. But they came and they destroyed all of his works. And so today, if you go back in the books of Rijal and the books of biographies of these transmitters of hadith, you see, for instance, that they say Marasil ibn Abi Umayr Masanid. They say we deal with the unattributed narrations. So a mursal, a hadith mursal, is that you do not have the full chain of transmitters all the way to the Imam. That's called mursal. So it's interrupted, it's incomplete as a chain. And usually that right away, immediately, makes the hadith much weaker, almost inauthentic. You don't know if you can rely on this hadith or not. You would need another hadith that says the same thing or something similar to corroborate what's in that hadith. Otherwise, you can't rely on it. But he's different. He is the exception. They say we know that everything that he is saying was in his books and he had learned it all by heart. And that he had the extreme rigor not to repeat a hadith that he did not know. To the point where when he says a hadith and it is mursal, consider it as musnad. Consider it as though it is fully attributed back to the Imam. Even if the attribution may be missing a name, if that's all that's missing, still consider it reliable. So long as the hadith is being given to you by him, it's reliable enough. This is how important he became as a source of ahadith. And he left behind, the works that he still left behind are 94 works. He left 94 works behind. And today, if you were to go through all of our books of ahadith, there are at least 5,300 ahadith that he is the transmitter of, which is a gigantic number, right? A single hadith that you transmit or a couple of ahadith that you transmit already makes you a transmitter of ahadith. He transmits 5,300 ahadith, this man. And that's why the Imams consider these people to be not ordinary people. They praise them greatly. They say they are extremely trustworthy. Some of them, they say, you are like Salman of our time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone knows what is your reward, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of praise to these specific companions of the Imams for the work and what they endured to be able to preserve and transmit their ahadith to the next generations. Safwan ibn Yahya is another. In the books of history and biography, they say no one worshipped as much as he did. He had 40 teachers who were all the students of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And he left 30 books behind. And today there are 1,180 narrations that he is the transmitter of in our books of transmission and books of narrations, and so on and so forth. And really, when you look at the lives of these people, today you might wonder, what did these people really do so that someone like this is subjected to this type of torture and imprisonment, and you cannot even dare openly say, I have heard so-and-so speak or transmit their sayings. It's incredible the level of censorship that is happening to these people. All of this because they are learning and transmitting the hadith of Ahlulbayt alayhim as-salam. And I simply say this so that perhaps we also give a little bit of importance to this topic, that we understand what those who preserve these ahadith went through to preserve each one of these ahadith down the generations, so that today we have access to all of the ahadith in our pocket in a mobile app, right? And the tens of thousands of these ahadith, at a click of a button, we have access to all of this. What these people went through and what risks they took to preserve these ahadith, to learn these ahadith, to travel from land to land, to find one teacher who may have a book, who may have heard a hadith that no one else has heard, and so on and so forth. There were other people who were also extremely important that we see perhaps not necessarily to be the scholars at the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, but Imam al-Kadhim also had a whole network of people around him, some of the companions. I want to talk about one of them. I don't have a lot of time. I want to wrap it up. It's taken a little bit longer than I was hoping. One of them, for instance, being Ali ibn Yaqtin. So I mention him very quickly because there's a lot of lessons to be learned, especially at the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. When we understand the difficulties, the extreme circumstances within which he was living and working and still influencing, we have to see what did that look like when we're saying that all of this becomes impossible to do openly and publicly. So one of the people who were devout, loyal followers of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam was Ali ibn Yaqtin. Ali ibn Yaqtin comes from a family of people who were devoutly loyal to Bani al-Abbas and who helped Bani al-Abbas get into power. So he is the aristocracy and the elites of society. He is the son of one of these people, and when the Khalifa becomes Khalifa, he appoints him as the minister. So Ali ibn Yaqtin, at that time they would call him the first minister, the person next after the Khalifa in importance. Not inheritance, he's not a heir to a throne, he's an administrator. Today we would say he is the Minister of Finance. He had the entire treasury of the Abbasid regime under his administration and management. This man, who had grown up with the person who becomes the Khalifa. He grew up in their households, they were best friends when they were children. This is the type of person that Ali ibn Yaqtin was. The first time he comes into contact with Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he is shocked, he is transformed, and right away he becomes immediately one of the most loyal and trustworthy companions of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam for the rest of his days. And so he would constantly come back to the Imam and he would beg the Imam, sometimes in person and most times in writing or sending messengers, telling the Imam, I beg of you to allow me to be released of my duties. I can no longer keep working for these people, to see what they see, to manage their affairs in this way. And the Imam orders him to stay in position and to use his position for the good, so that he is able to influence the policies of taxation. He is able to reduce the oppression of those who are poor, and those who need help are supported by him. He comes to their aid. He finds ways to influence from within. And oftentimes the Imam gives him very specific instructions. You ought to behave in this way. You ought to make those and those decisions, and so on and so forth. I leave it at that simply to say there is a lot to unpack and think about. There were others. This one is the most prominent of the personalities, where we see that the Imam is not telling them, you shall never ever have anything to do with these oppressors and these tyrants. And no, the Imam is taking another approach, and he is teaching his companions, those who are able to understand and to have the strategic mind, who are able to understand and not be themselves affected, and to be themselves sources of positive influence. The Imam is telling them, you remain in position and you influence and you do the good work from inside of this oppressive, tyrannical regime. We go to year 179. I'll wrap it up with this. This is when Harun al-Rashid goes to visit al-Madinah al-Munawwara, and he encounters Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. There is a bit of back and forth between them. He also witnesses how the people interact with the Imam. And once again, we see that it is too much for them to see that the Imam is at this level of holiness and sanctity for the people of Medina. At the end, Harun al-Rashid goes to the grave of the Holy Prophet ﷺ that he had seen in his dream right before. And he tells the grave, he speaks to the grave of the Holy Prophet. The books of history say that he told the Holy Prophet, I apologize to you for what I am about to do to your progeny. And then he ordered that Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam be taken as a prisoner. And so two types of cages that you can't see really what's going on under them. It's like a dome, qubba, as they say. They are set up, they are carried by camels and animals. So two of them were prepared, and the Imam was chained and put into one of them. And they were sent to different places so that people are not clear in where the Imam is actually being taken. The Imam was taken to Basra. And when he is taken to Basra, there's a little bit of back and forth and details, but the Imam is imprisoned in Basra. Okay, and so now we are at the end of the life of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. That last 4 to 5 years, about 4 years of the life of the Imam, he basically spent it only in jails. And so he is brought to this first jail in Basra. Isa ibn Abi Jafar is the owner and the manager who is appointed and asked to take and charge of the affairs of the Imam as a prisoner. And this is where we start to see that he is directly and immediately influenced by the Imam. And these are not people chosen because they are, lenient and polite and civilized people. They are being chosen. Harun basically wants to get rid of the Imam, but he does not want the blood of the Imam to be directly linked to him, not to have the blood directly on his own hands. And this is very clear for anyone who studies that history. And so he is too lenient with the Imam. This man starts to see how the Imam is, how he behaves, how he prays, he spends his whole time in worship. So he becomes a little bit lenient with the Imam. While the Imam is under his imprisonment, he allows the Imam to have visitors. And so the scholars and the companions started to flow in and to go visit the Imam in his period of imprisonment. And the Imam would answer their questions and so on and so forth here. And he wrote, so Harun writes to Isa telling him, this is an order, kill the Imam immediately. This man thought about it. He spoke to some of his closest confidants. They told him, do not proceed with this. You can see that this is a holy man. You should never proceed with this type of crime. He has done nothing wrong. You have no reason to do this. Find a reason not to do it. He wrote back and he told him, I cannot proceed with what you are asking me to do. You have to excuse me from this. And so at that time, the Imam had already spent 1 year in that jail. Okay, so this is the first jail. So the Imam is carried from that jail in Basra to Baghdad. So now the Imam is brought to Al-Fadl ibn Rabi'. Now he is going to be moved from place to place. Al-Fadl ibn Rabi' is considered like one of the ministers. They are the aristocratic families of Bani al-Abbas and those working with them. But now in Baghdad, Harun has to be very careful because people know the Imam very well. And now it is an extremely big city and it's very easy to get to the Imam. And people should not see that the Imam is directly under prison. So we have to find a way to keep him aside and people not to know that the Imam is being imprisoned by the Khalifa in the capital. This does not last long. This man keeps being shocked at how the Imam is. And this is where you see the riwayat. He would sit at the top of his house and the Imam was placed in kind of an open yard. So there is no roof on top of the Imam. There's just 4 walls and the Imam is imprisoned in those 4 walls. And he says when others would come and they would talk to him, he would be sitting on the roof just watching the Imam all day. And would tell them, what do you see? And one of the men told him, it looks like a piece of fabric on the ground. And the Imam that man told him, Rabi' told him, look closer, keep looking. And he kept looking and he told him, is that a man performing prostration, performing sujood? He told him, yes. This is a man who performs sujood his whole day. He spends his whole day in this state. He fasts all day, he prays all night, and he performs this sujood for hours every day. And they want me to kill this man. What has this man done? And I have listened to him, and I have sent people to listen to what he says. And even in his prayers, he doesn't pray against me, and he doesn't pray against the Khilafah, and he doesn't pray except for the goodness of all and his own forgiveness from God. That's all that I hear and I see from him. So how can I proceed to this crime? I cannot. So this continued, and here we are told that Harun himself saw a dream, and the dream scared him. And he got so scared, he woke up and he ordered immediately that the Imam be released. When the Imam was released, the order was that the Imam be put in a house, but under house arrest. The Imam is not allowed to leave that house, the vicinity of that house. He must stay there. He cannot leave, go back to Medina, or so on and so forth. So this was the case, but it does not look like this lasted for too long. This is, by the way, where if you have heard the story of Bishr al-Hafi, there is this man, a companion, he became a devout companion of Imam al-Kadhim. By the way, this is a trend that you see. Anyone who comes too close to the Imams, you fall in love with them. You become their loyal servant and devout follower because you cannot help it. So this man was inside his house and the Imam was walking in the street and he heard all sorts of singing and dancing and indecency coming out from that house. And there was a little girl who was throwing out trash or doing something similar coming out of the house. So the Imam asked her, is the Lord of this house, or your Lord, or the Lord of this house, is he a free man or a slave? And she told him, no, he's a free man. He said, of course he's a free man. If he were a slave, he would not be acting in this way. That's all he said. And he kept walking. A few moments later, the man came out running from his house. And without sandals. His head wasn't covered. So he came out, with his clothes that he would not wear outside the house. And he was not wearing anything. Hafi. Right? Without anything covering his feet. And that's why his name is known as Bishr al-Hafi. Because he ran after Imam al-Kadhim without anything on his feet. No sandals, no shoes, nothing. And he threw himself on the feet of the Imam and he asked the Imam whether Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would accept his forgiveness. The Imam didn't even talk to him. That little girl went back and spoke to him and told him, Musa bin Jafar passed by and he asked whether you are a free man or a slave. But he understood. He understood that the Imam meant, are you a slave of God or not? Are you a servant of God or not? Because if you are truly a servant of God, this would not be happening. You would not be behaving this way. But clearly, you are not a servant of God. Right? You are not a abd. You do not understand what it means to be a abd to your God. And of course you behave this way. That's all the Imam said. Someone else would say, of course, what's the big deal? But to this man, it transformed his life. And he was not even in the presence of the Imam. The words of the Imam reached him and it was enough. In any case, so I say this because it seems clear that this is while the Imam was under this house arrest in Baghdad that this is happening. In any case, so we continue and then the Imam is taken once again to jail. And this goes on back and forth. Harun doesn't know what to do with the Imam And so he is put in another jail, at the jail of al-Fadl ibn Yahya. And this jail does not last long either. It seems to be for a very short time. Al-Fadl again notices how the Imam is, and he cannot dare do what Harun is asking him to do. And once again, he is too lenient with the Imam. And he allows people to come as visitors and to learn from the Imam and to ask the Imam. Harun becomes very angry here, and he brings this Fadl ibn Yahya, and he punishes him, and he gets lashed and whipped, and so on and so forth, and he is sent to yet another jail. And this is when the Imam is sent to the jail of al-Sindi ibn Shahik. So al-Sindi ibn Shahik is known to be extremely ruthless, and he is sent, this time the Imam is sent with very clear instructions that you are not, the reason why I'm sending him to you is because all the others failed to do as I ordered them to do. And so when he is sent to this jail, he acts extremely ruthlessly with the Imam. The Imam is put in basically what would be the equivalent to a hole in the ground. And this is where he spent the rest of his days, the Imam, under al-Sindi ibn Shahik. He had very little access to food or water. He had no access to fresh air. He would get beaten up. He was wearing chains that were at least 30 today, but we would say between 30 and 90 pounds. It's difficult to properly assess the 30 ratl, which type of ratl it is, but the chains alone were between 30 and 90 pounds on the body of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam during that time. And that he could not move, and he was attached by his foot by another chain, and so on and so forth. And during that time, al-Sindi ibn Shahik would appoint the director, the leader of the armed forces, the police of Baghdad, to come and deal with the Imam oftentimes. And again, this man they would only use for torture and executions. So this is the type of person that is sent to deal with the Imam. And today that's why you find sometimes, especially in Iraq and elsewhere, they say perhaps the Imam was killed in a house of a man by the name of al-Musayyib. Al-Musayyib is who? Is this man. Okay, so some say he remained under the prison of al-Sindi ibn Shahik, and some say al-Sindi asked this man to take him to his own house and imprison him there and deal with him there. Again, this man, al-Musayyib, fell in love with the Imam. So this ruthless, savage, barbaric man, once again, as he spends time with the Imam, he gets affected by the Imam. He cannot continue to tolerate what he's being asked to do with the Imam, and so he also becomes a little bit lenient with the Imam. And this is where we find some of the answers that the Imam provides, either in writing or because he allowed some people who found ways to come visit the Imam in that imprisonment. So by here we just went through between 5 and 7 different imprisonments of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam during that last 4 to 5 years of his life. So at that time, when people were coming, and it's very important, when people were coming to visit the Imam starts to become very clear in that he is going to leave this world very soon. So he writes a full will. He appoints a successor. He tells them that after I leave this world, it will be my son, Ali, who is going to be my successor. And he starts to appoint representatives. He says, in so and so land, my representative is so and so. In so and so area and region, my representative is so and so. And this is to continue and preserve the network of the representatives and the scholars and the students of the Imam to keep going. And this man at some point, al-Musayyib, as we said, he comes to visit the Imam. He tells him, I can't bear this, to see you in this state anymore. He was crying. The Imam told him, I'm departing from this world in 3 days. And then they say Harun was eating dates and he got fed up with this whole back and forth that no one wants to dare do what is supposed to be done with the Imam, and everybody finds an excuse not to do it, even those who are willing to get punished or even at the risk of being killed. No one wants to kill the Imam. So at the end he was eating dates and he said, use these dates to rid me of this man. And so this is when they say Sindi ibn Shahik is the one who would have performed this act, and the Imam ate from those dates and he passed away. Right away, Bani al-Abbas, right away they started to say, we did not do anything to him, he died by himself. And they brought in doctors and they brought in investigators. The police force was brought in to investigate, to show that there was no harm on the body of the Imam, showing that there was no blow to the head, nothing was done to the neck or the back, and so on and so forth. But as soon as he was taken, he was placed on a bridge in Baghdad, and today we call it al-Kadhimiyya or al-Kadhimain. This is why it is called al-Kadhimain, for him, for his name. And when they came, right away they said that this is a man, the doctors who came, they said this is a man who has been poisoned. Let his tribe and family ask for his blood in revenge, because this is not a man who has just died. And there's a whole discussion that we can have about what happened and how some of Bani al-Abbas came and they wanted to make sure that the Imam is properly buried and so on and so forth. The conclusion from all of this, I think, is in a couple of minutes simply to say that we can see clearly from the life of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam that it is not normal, ordinary, easy circumstances for someone to just do their work. And regardless of that, the Imam found ways to continue to be influential and to continue to be a source of positive goodness in the world, to the point where the entire state considered him to be that influential and that much of a threat to their own existence, that people are naturally drawn to follow him and not follow anyone else. That we see the Imam, in order to do this, was not working perhaps the way that, in a simplistic way we would expect an Imam to work. He was a lot more strategic. There's a lot more depth and judgment and analysis required to understand how the Imam is behaving, and this becomes extremely important and increasingly important, especially from the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam and onward. Because when we look at the circumstances of Imam al-Rida, they are more difficult, and the circumstances of Imam al-Jawad, more difficult, yet more difficult. Imam al-Hadi, even more difficult. Imam al-Askari, even more difficult. And so this means the Imams are not worried about themselves. The Imams are worried about how are their followers, how will the community of followers interested in the teachings of Islam still have access to what is the truth? How will they be able to find a way to know the truth when their Imam, for instance in this case, is inaccessible, behind bars, in a faraway land? Or perhaps down the line, when the Imam is in occultation and people no longer have a direct access to the Imam, can we still proceed and can we still know the truth and continue on and be strategic, smart, intelligent sources of good in the world, or does everything crumble? This is where we start to see that this is very deliberate, intentional, strategic work from the Imams, and each one of the Imams is going to come and add layers to this so that this community is preserved and equipped to deal with whatever is going to happen down the line in future generations, as we are dealing with today in our inaccessibility to the Imam of our time. So this is where we start to see the seeds of that work starting to take place at the time of Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. I apologize if I went much longer than I was supposed to. Inshallah, this was beneficial. I don't know if there's any interest for Q&A or a discussion. If there is, I'm more than happy to engage. Otherwise, I thank you all very much. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept everyone's deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be of those who understand the lives of Ahlulbayt and those who followed in their footsteps and their sacrifices, and also be of those who know how to follow in those footsteps with the same fervor and in the same passion and the same sincerity, so that we can also pass this on to the next generations. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.